I'm in the vehicle assembly building, and I'm calling this advanced construction, but really, it's just more tools and tricks of the trade. I'm going to put down my command pod, and I believe I have unlocked decouplers now. I will have a decoupler. Notice how this added a stage over here? So that means when I press spacebar, I'm actually going to drop whatever's connected to this decoupler. And now I've switched over to a different save file to give you a preview of further up the tech tree. You get these radial decouplers, and they work basically the same as the regular decouplers, but you can attach them to the sides like this, and then you can plant an engine on them, or a fuel tank, like that. And then we can duplicate them with symmetry mode from here. And they function just like the other decoupler. When we hit spacebar, when this stage happens, we'll dump the solid rocket boosters. And then, just to get you thinking about the possibilities, watch me stick this structure piece on the side of this decoupler, put this booster into symmetry mode, and now check that out, I've got two of them. And if I were to grab the master part, like we discussed earlier, this radial decoupler, and again in symmetry mode, attach them to the sides. Aside from the fact that I badly need stabilization on this, when I run out of fuel, I will hit spacebar and send all four of those flying. Now if I had a SAS unit, that wouldn't have been happening, so let's add that now. So we're going to go into control here, and right now I have these two unlocked. There's even a bigger, better one, but this one's the better of the two. This one's kind of the next level down, but since we have the better one, and this thing's kind of an unwily beast, so let's add it. And basically it's just another set of reaction wheels. So we already have stabilization in this cockpit with its reaction wheels, and now we've kind of doubled its ability. So let's see how that flies. Didn't help much, did it? Alright, that means that we need to talk about struts. Because what's actually happening is, while these engines are pushing up, they're waving around on however they're welded to this structure piece. So we're going to talk about struts, and they're in structure, and it's this weird bar looking thing, and that's really what it is it's a metal bar that you can put between any two objects by clicking and clicking. Now you see how I've made a single metal bar from here to here? That's going to help bind these pieces together. And in all cases, it's a good idea to put a strut at the top of an adjoining part and at the bottom. And triangles with struts are very powerful. Notice how we've just got the one bar. You may have guessed, we're going to want to try symmetry mode on this. Now notice we've got a mirroring bar on the other side. We're going to do the same on the bottom with another strut. Notice how we've got another one on the other side. And we're going to just want to go around and cover all of our weaknesses, because basically the strut is going to unload any physics that's going on onto the next part. I suppose actually the best way to continue construction on this would be to grab the master part, change from symmetry mode to 1, and you can use the hotkey X, attach it to any side, and then tinker around with these first and then put them back on in symmetry mode. That's just kind of a technique, but it can often help make things simpler. If you're looking for how to delete a part you've put out, like let's say I put this decoupler out and I do not want it, just click anywhere in this blankness and it's gone. Well, I've got that side looking good. I'm going to grab that master part. I'm going to put it back into symmetry mode, so there's one on each side. And now notice how my struts are connected on either side, and I'm just missing the one. Well, there we are. Let's see how it flies. And that should help, and if it doesn't, we're going to add a set of struts connecting each of these solid rocket boosters to the main body. But you definitely don't want to go strut crazy, because like I said, it's like they offload physics to the next part. So if you just go strut crazy all over something, you can just have inherent stability problems. Here we go. Notice how we're flying up perfectly straight. And I hope that was a really good explanation of how and why you use struts. They're cool, and they can be used artistically to make your stuff look cool, but they're a pain in the butt. But one of the large parts to KSP is just tinkering with parts. Like, instead of the strut option, I wonder what would have happened if we just added 4 more SAS units. Remember, for all these reaction wheels to help, this has to be illuminated. We have to strike T. And also remember that the reaction wheels are only going to work so long as we continue to have electrical power. It does seem to have helped a bit, honestly, especially if I start using keys to try to normalize it. Yeah, that did help a little bit. The struts was the way to go, though. But that's a way to add additional stabilization. While we're discussing control, what if I added a tank of monopropellant? That's these tanks here. And I put some thrusters around my center of mass. Center of mass indicator down here. See how it's made this yellow ball? Well, if I put some thrusters around that center of mass, I'm using X, trying to get them to attach there. See, they need to be green, red. That's pretty close. For these thrusters to help stabilize us, we want SAS on. You just basically always want SAS on when you're trying to fly stable on the nav ball. But then we also want RCS on, which is R. Let's see if that helps us at all. You can see the thrusters are firing, but really it doesn't seem to have helped very much. They're very helpful in space. Well, since we're in an atmosphere, what if we put some wings on it to help stabilize us? Let's go into aerodynamic, and let's just grab any set of wings. Remember our center of mass button that you were briefly just showed? Center of lift button is next to it, and it will make this blue ball appear whenever lift is a factor. Put 4 of them on here, 1 for each direction. See how that flies. We've got SAS on. You can see how these wings are actually bending? They're trying to help steer my ship by bending the air around them, or by moving the air around them. That did actually help quite a bit. Typically, in a rocket, the relationship between the center of lift and the center of mass doesn't really matter. Usually rockets have their fins to steer them down at the bottom. But center of lift is very important with space planes, which we're going to talk about in the next episode. Another thing we should talk about is the center of thrust, which you usually want to have directly lined up with the center of mass. To fly in a straight line, you want to have it lined up with the center of mass. Another way we could have stabilized our flight in this would be to use engines that gimbal. This engine we have here, this big guy, he doesn't swivel. The nozzle on it doesn't swivel, which is unfortunately briefly mentioned in the description in all this big paragraph of text. Hopefully it's going back to being more specific. It used to be just a kind of a bullet point. But if we switch to this bottom engine, change up our staging to activate it with these solids, this engine should help to steer it quite a bit. I am still spinning, but not as bad as I was in the very beginning. And I have some amount of control using my directional keys. I'm using Q and E right there. And now's a good time to talk about keys in the vehicle builder. In the vehicle builder or the spaceship hangar, you can zoom in with the plus and minus buttons on the number pad, and you can rotate any part you have selected with WASD, Q, and E. Any part you have selected, holding down shift and pressing the space bar will reset its rotation, anything you've rotated it to, and also holding shift plus WASD, Q or E, any of those directionals, will rotate your part by small increments, which makes constructing about anything possible. And the last set of keys I want to talk about are the number keys, and those are the action groups, and they're programmable hotkeys. Every part, just about every part anyway, you can right click on them and get a series of options to click on. Well, with these keys, you can program them to do a bunch of stuff all at one press, and I'm going to show you how. And my example is going to be a launch abort system. And to build our abort system, we're going to want a decoupler, because we're going to want to be able to pull our capsule off. We're going to want to make sure we use the plus button down here to make and drag it into its own group. The engines are all fine, that all looks groovy. And now we're going to need a parachute. And lastly, we're going to need a way to fling this off of the rocket. And I really like using these little Sepatron motors. They'll be unlocked up the tech tree. I've got them in symmetry mode so I can have one on each side. We're going to put them here by themselves so they don't happen by accident. And then we're going to go into this button here, the gears. And here are our action groups. We're going to go to the Abort button, which is actually backspace. We're going to select these. So we've got Abort button selected, we've selected these, see how they're illuminated. And we're going to tell them that when we press Abort, we want to activate these engines. But also when we press Abort, we want this decoupler to decouple. And you see it illuminates all the spaceship we're going to lose. And the other thing we're going to want to do is go into 10 here, which is the 0 key. We're going to select our parachute. And when we press 0, it's going to deploy our chute. On our flight, something's gone wrong, but that's okay. With our action keys, we can mouse up here to abort, or we can hit backspace. And our capsule is trying to leave the rocket. Oh, barely enough thrust to escape from that rocket. And now we're going to press the 0 key, which we have bound to our parachute, saving the life of yet another young Kerbal. Oh, Jeb. Of course, it's always Jeb. So now we've gone over some more advanced ways to build your vehicles, but where do you send these vehicles? Well, if you're trying to get science points, obviously you're going to be putting science parts onto your vehicles, and you're going to be running the experiments on them. But here's a handy way to know how you're going to bring more science payload back. Okay, let's start with Kerbin. Here's a projection map of Kerbin itself. And it's just nice to look here and see everything's color-coded. Each one of these biomes would count as a new place for science points to run an experiment. What I mean is, in any of these different colored areas, when you run an experiment, you're going to get the full science point value. Now let's move on to the Mun. Zoom out, go over here. Same deal here. Each one of these different colored areas, maximum science output for any experiments you run there. But the other thing you have to remember too is with each of these biomes, not only the location on the map, but also all the altitudes stacked on top of that. And what I mean is you run the experiment when you're landed, you run it a little higher up, you run it higher up into the atmosphere or higher up into orbit, and you're going to get a different science payload, a different experience point payout for conducting the experiments there. And really quick, Minmus. And eventually all the different planetary bodies will be this way. Exact same kind of thing going on Minmus. And thanks to the wiki, that's where I found these images. Thanks for watching. Next episode we're going to talk about space planes, but we're also going to discuss fuel lines.